to one of our first Zoom webinars. My name is Judy Kitt. I'm the current president of the Foundation for Mind Being Research, known as FMBR. If you're new to us, we were founded in 1980 by scientists and healers and artists who were interested in exploring the intersection of science and human consciousness and ancient wisdom traditions. So for the last 40 years, we've been working to expand the context within which we see ourselves, both as individuals and as a species, so that we can actively participate in the evolution of consciousness on this planet. Up until a few months ago, we were, we're calling in the before times, our meetings were in person in their presentations in Northern California, in Palo Alto. Of course, the pandemic has forced us all to go online. And so now that we're here, we, instead of doing one event a month, we'll probably be doing 1 to 3 events a month because we can. And because we know lots of really interesting people and we're excited to bring their work to you. I want to let you know that next Friday, the 24th, we'll be having Brenda Dunn present her work for the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, the program that was that flourished for 3 decades under the direction of Robert John, the Dean of Princeton's University School of Engineering and Applied Science. Her talk will describe the research findings and explore their implications for a better understanding of the role of consciousness in the establishment of physical reality. So that's next Friday night at 5 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. Before I start, I wanted to remind you that if you have any questions for Mr. Dennett, you can put them in the chat box and I will ask them at the end of the presentation. So this evening, we're really excited to welcome Preston Dennett. He was originally scheduled to be our April speaker, but we're happy to have him now. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, known as MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 26 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines. His writing has been translated into several different languages, and he has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Coast to Coast and the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. So Preston, welcome. You're going to be speaking to us tonight about UFO healings. And I know in the UFO communities, there's a lot of discussion about a lot of topics, but you don't often hear about healings. So what drew you to that?
Yeah, this was not something I was looking for. I got into this field very skeptical and did not believe in UFOs, and certainly not in UFO healings. I thought anyone, even after I'd investigated UFOs for some time, I thought people who believed in that you were being healed by aliens, probably had a psychopathological need to believe in a higher power. I was skeptical, but I kept running into cases. And as I became a more active investigator, I got my own first case, and it kind of just snowballed from there.
Wonderful. Well, we're so excited to hear your presentation.
Yeah, I've got a nice PowerPoint, and I'm ready to go when you are.
Go ahead.
All right, so let me share screen. And let's see here, and we'll get it going. All right. Can you see that?
I can see that, yep.
All right, yeah. This presentation is all about the healing power of UFOs. I became a UFO researcher or interested in UFOs in 1986. I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. Didn't believe it for a second, but started asking my family, my friends, my coworkers what they thought of this ridiculous pilot, and got a real shock. Found out that my brother had seen a UFO, my sister-in-law, my other sister-in-law, a couple of friends, several people at work. And some of these were very close encounters involving missing time or even gray type ETs. So this was a real shock. I felt scandalized. I was really upset with these people that I loved and trusted because I felt like they were lying to me. And it really kind of set me on a path to find out are UFOs real? And just have not looked back. I joined all the UFO organizations. I started interviewing people formally, writing articles, going on the radio. Now written some 20 books on UFOs and several on the paranormal. And this was my first book, Ufo Healings. This covered 100 cases. It was published in 1996. I'd planned to write a small article after learning that someone I knew had had this experience. And I found pretty quickly about 30 or 40 cases, dug in, and after about a year of research, had more than doubled that to about 100 cases. So I still felt at this time that it was a pretty rare feature of UFO contact. But I have to tell you, every time I spoke on this, I would get someone coming up to me afterwards, sharing a story. And as the years went on, I just got more and more cases. I published an article for the UFO Journal, brought in more cases. And what I found is that most major researchers have uncovered cases like these. This is Virginia Aronson. She wrote the book Celestial Healings, which kind of picked up where my book left off and revealed a dozen more cases. Here's another book which started to show the positive side of ETs. At this time, this was like mid-1990s, you didn't hear a lot about positive UFO encounters. It was very focused on abductions, and people who said that they had a friendly encounter were ridiculed, I think, a bit more than those who said that they had had a scary abduction, say. And slowly, more and more people began to recognize that there are, in fact, positive encounters. This is Adrian DeVere. He also wrote a book about UFO healings. In his book, it's more focused on people who channel ETs or do healings through sort of Reiki type work or mediumship, which I find very interesting because this is something I'll talk about a little bit later. But people who have extensive encounters often end up becoming very interested in healing and doing healing themselves. So this is the book I just wrote. It came out about just over a year ago, or less than a year. And it covers 300 cases of people who have reported a UFO healing. And by a healing, I mean a physiological improvement as a result of a UFO encounter. Here's Gordon Creighton, editor of the Flying Saucer Review. He's the first person to really look at UFO healings. Back in 1970, he wrote an article for the Flying Saucer Review called Healing from UFOs and outlined half a dozen cases and was the first person to really say that this is happening. But what I found is most researchers, I'm going to say pretty much all major abduction researchers certainly have these cases. Bud Hopkins never wrote about a single one. And I was curious about that. I cornered him at the Coronado Island UFO conference in 1994 and I asked him point blank, do you get healing cases? And he admitted that yes, he has gotten a number of them. David Jacobs, leading UFO researcher, author of Secret Life, has reported a number of healing cases of pneumonia, diphtheria, and other serious illnesses. John Mack as well. He's contributed a number of prominent healing cases. Edith Fiore, PhD, is, I believe, the first person with a PhD to write a book about abductions. She got involved in UFO research after doing past life regressions and kind of stumbled into it. She reports that fully half of the people she's worked with have had healings. Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs thought it was pretty rare. John Mack thought it was a little more common. Edith Fiore says, no, it's pretty darn common. And there have been some studies of how common it is. The most recent one was with the Free organization founded by Reynero Hernandez. And they also found that 50% of experiencers have reported some sort of healing event. Barbara Lamb is a leading Southern California researcher, has uncovered dozens of healing cases, people healed of back pain, of heart problems, and more. Brad Steiger, another prominent researcher who's uncovered healing cases. My point is these aren't as uncommon as you might think. Yvonne Smith, she uncovered a case involving a person who was allegedly cured of AIDS. Not the only case I have of that. Wendell Stevens, he's written a number of books, has also reported healing cases. Richard and Lee K. Boyland wrote one of the first books that took a positive viewpoint towards UFO encounters and also reported several healings, including of cancer. So yeah, lots of researchers have reported healings. And I think really it's a lot more common than I originally thought. I'm not sure if it's 50%, but I'm going to say at least 20, 25% in my own research. People who have repeated or extensive encounters will experience something like this. So what I want to talk a little bit now is, why I think aliens make good doctors. And if you look at abduction accounts, the one experience that occurs the most and varies the least is the physical examination. This was first pointed out by researcher Thomas Bullard. He did a study of some 300 abduction cases and found out that, yeah, the examination is what most people report. That's certainly true in my own experience. So what it looks like is that these ETs probably know more about the human body than we do. And I say that because there are several cases of people who've been healed of chronic illnesses. Now, and another point I want to make is that a person is taken inside a UFO. There are very strong medical themes going on. It's not only a physical examination, but the room is described as being very clean. The beings often are wearing lab coats. Sometimes the experiencers refer to them as doctors. So there's a very strong medical theme that runs all through this. And when I first started looking into this, I started to look at UFOs really as more like floating hospitals than anything else, because that does seem to be their main agenda, is physically examining people. And honestly, I think one of their main agendas is healing humanity. And as I get through these cases, you'll see why. So they heal people in a number of different ways. Most common is some form of light beams. Perhaps a UFO shines down from above, or perhaps they're taken inside and there's little instruments handheld that send out beams of light. But that's certainly the most common. There are a few cases where people are given medicine of some kind, pills, a salve, a lotion, or some sort of drink. Now, medical evidence is a very important part of UFO research. It can make or break a case. And if you look at the MUFON journal, they've got a section on it, and it's marked injuries. They don't even mention healings. There are some 400 to 1,000 cases of medical injuries that are on record. I think it's much larger than that if you were to really catalog them. But very common are scars that appear on people's bodies following an abduction event or a missing time event. And some people do remember these procedures taking place and can tie in this experience to that scar. For others, it just appears. But this is what we call medical evidence, and there's lots of good evidence supporting this. This is a MRI from a gentleman I work with, Mike Evans, who was diagnosed with a foreign body in his brain. These are known as implants. Another great case involving medical evidence occurred to 3 women, Elaine Thomas, Mona Stafford, and Louise Smith. In 1976, they were driving through Kentucky when they were pulled up into a UFO. Afterwards, all 3 of them suffered from severe eye irritation, burns, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, and weight loss. These are symptoms you cannot fake. Here's Denise Bishop. Her case was investigated by Timothy Good. She went outside and was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, which caused a laser burn on her hand. She went to the doctor, and that's what he had diagnosed it as. This is Stephen Michalek. He's from Falcon Lake, Canada. He got too close to a landed UFO. It took off, and he felt a lot of heat. His shirt was set on fire, and I started to feel very bad, was rushed to the hospital, and was diagnosed with, they couldn't really tell, some sort of radiation sickness, they think. He had fainting, weight loss, headaches, diarrhea. His joints swelled up, and his hands, severe eye irritation. He ended up losing 22 pounds, and his blood lymphocyte count went from 25 to 16%. So he was examined by dozens of doctors who were unable to account for his symptoms. So yeah, this is what we call medical evidence. This next slide is a little traumatic. I just want to warn you. But there are some severe cases of people who've been killed as a result of a UFO encounter. It's pretty rare. There are some human mutilation cases. I just point this out because I'm not saying that all UFOs are friendly or they're here to save us or cure us. There are two sides to this phenomena. What I found is the ET's behavior falls very much in an umbrella, sort of a bell curve. It's the same umbrella as human behavior, but it's honestly far less hostile. I could prove to you that humans were hostile much more easily, because when someone's taken on board a UFO, rarely do I get any accounts of what I would call sadistic behavior or torture or this sort of thing. And when someone is kidnapped on Earth, it rarely ends well. When someone's kidnapped into a UFO, it can be very traumatic, and there's really no excuse for it, even if you do get healed, I feel, because it's a crime on every country on Earth. So this is a problem. But the good news is people are coming back healed, spiritually transformed, with warnings of environmental destruction and other spiritual advice. So ultimately, I think it's really positive, and I'm most excited about this whole healing aspect. So what I found is that the healings take place in a few different places, locations. I would say about 22% take place in people's homes. They're visited in their bedroom, and the healing takes place right there. I would say the most common is about 50% cases are on board a UFO. Someone's taken on board and given an operation. It doesn't necessarily involve opening up the body. Sometimes it's just lights or even sounds. Sometimes it's not instruments at all. Another category, about 20%, is that people who are just outside, walking, usually driving, often at night, and a UFO hovers over their car, or they can be in the mere presence of a UFO, and sometimes this affects the healing in very mysterious ways that I don't quite understand. One thing that really shocked me, honestly, is that 10% of the cases, probably a little higher than this, take place in hospitals. And I know how that sounds, but this is what the evidence is showing us. Case after case, people report grays, praying mantis, human-looking, small humanoids appearing in their hospital room and affecting a cure, or even being abducted out of a hotel. A hospital. This sketch here is Cowichan Hospital in British Columbia. A nurse, Doreen Kendall, saw this UFO looking in through the window. And my question is, what's it doing? Why is it so curious about what's going on in hospitals? I think it's because they're very much interested in our physiology and healing. This is the hospital where that object hovered. So what I want to do is just get into some of the cases, because there's a lot. Probably the largest category would be flesh wounds of some kind. People who are cured of cuts, broken bones, bruises, burns on any part of their body, sometimes multiple injuries. Here's a very early and famous case. This took place on September 3rd, 1965. Two police officers from Damon, Texas, Robert Good and Deputy McCoy, were on, I believe they had been called actually to a UFO sighting, and came came upon it. They saw it. It was a very large object. It was, you can see the shape right here, about 50 feet across. It was shining a purple beam of light down on the field. And as it shined this beam of light, it started to move towards the patrol car, the cruiser. Well, Deputy Robert Good had his arm hanging out the window. And he said, as soon as this beam hit him, he could actually feel it. It was kind of warm and tingling. And it freaked them out. They drove away very quickly. They were afraid and pulled off in, some minutes later in a diner. Well, at that time, Robert Good had earlier that day been bitten on his finger by his son's baby pet alligator. So he had this wound on his finger. It was sore, it was inflamed, it was bleeding, it was all bandaged up. And as he pulls into this diner and they sit down, he realizes it's no longer hurting. And he pulls off the bandage and the cut is completely gone. So there are a number of cases like this. I mean, there was another case of 1991, a Puerto Rican fisherman, Jose Fernandez, had been bitten by a shark. And he was visited by a UFO in his home, and it closed up the wound on his leg. Didn't completely cure it, but sped up the healing. Another case, very well known, comes from researcher Jacques Vallée. This occurred on November 2nd, 1968 in the French Alps. A medical doctor had woke up in the middle of the night and saw two discs, two glowing flying saucers hovering outside his son's bedroom. They merged into one, turned towards him, and shined a beam of light which struck him on the face and chest. He was very dazed. He stumbled back into his room and fell asleep, and woke up the next morning and got a real shock. For one thing, he had just cut his ankle with an axe, gashed it really badly 2 days earlier, had this huge gash on his ankle. He wasn't limping, and the gash was completely gone. But even more surprising was years earlier, he had been injured in the Algerian War and suffered from partial chronic paralysis. And his paralysis was gone. He was able to resume piano playing, which he had been really into. So he received 2 healings in one. So that's not the only case like that. A number of cases do involve multiple healings. Timothy Green Beckley investigated a case which took place in New York. A group of people, including a columnist, fairly well known by the name of Brandon Blackman, watched this UFO from Prospect Park. It just darted around for a while and took off. Brandon Blackman went home, and he had cut himself earlier, and when he took off his bandage, was shocked to see that the cut was completely gone. He has no idea how this happened. He was not struck by a beam of light. It had no missing time that he's aware of. This is one of several cases where just being in the presence of a UFO seems to affect a cure. So there are lots of cases of healings of flesh wounds. Gordon Creighton in 1952, he wrote about a gentleman by the name of Hans Klotzbach, who had jumped off a train and broke both his legs and was immediately scooped up by a UFO who healed him of his injuries. One gentleman I interviewed personally, he lives in Belgium. He was suffering from an undiagnosed foot injury, perhaps an arthritic-like condition. The doctors weren't able to diagnose it, but it got worse and worse to the point where he was using crutches, and it looked like he was going to be wheelchair-bound. He wasn't responding to any therapies, and was really upset because he's a very young man and very active. And he went to the park. He's not a religious guy, so he just went to a nature setting and prayed to the universe to help him out. And that night, he was visited by 3 beings in his bedroom who he believes are extraterrestrials. One he called the doctor, 2 he felt were guards. And the doctor grabbed his foot. Now he's in a semi-paralysis state. semi-awake, unable to move. And this being grabs his foot and starts twisting it in very painful positions for a number of minutes, and hurt him really bad. He was actually pretty upset because he wasn't sure what was going on. He thought perhaps he was being assaulted and robbed. And next thing he knows, it's the morning. He jumps out of bed and sees there's no one in his room, runs down the stairs because he's thinking they're still in the house, and checks the front door. It's still locked. There's no one in the house. And only after he had run halfway, down the stairs did he realize he was running. He had not been able to run for weeks and weeks. His foot was completely healed. So there's a percentage of cases of people who have asked for healing and received it, but it's not super common. There was another case which I found very interesting, occurred to Jim Law in Gainesville, Florida. He has had a lot of experiences. Most people who have healings have a history of UFO encounters, about half, and this was true of him. He woke up, found grays around his bed. He was no longer frightened of them. It had happened too much. He was kind of used to it. And he's like, if you guys are going to take me, why don't you heal me of my hernia? He had just gotten a hernia. And they told him, we know of your condition and we will repair it. And they did very quickly, right there. Really surprised him. And he's like, so he asked them another question. He says, why are you taking me? Why are you abducting me? And they told him, we are very interested in your genetic propensity to live a long time, which he found very interesting because his grandfather was 106 years old and still active. In fact, he was writing a book about him. So this is very interesting to me because there are a number of researchers who feel like the human race has been genetically intervened with for centuries. There are some writings that may support this, but at any rate, what we have found is, increasing longevity in humanity. Our lifespan has what doubled in the last 100 years. So maybe it's not a coincidence. Here's another case I'd like to talk about. This is Sergeant Charles Moody. In 1975, he experienced an abduction which he resisted. He did not want to go on board. It was very frightening, and he ended up getting injured during this process. He tweaked his back pretty badly, and the ETs healed him of the injury he sustained during the abduction using a cylindrical device. I got at least 10, 15 cases of people who were healed of back pain. One lady I interviewed she lives in Norway. In 1991, she had actually had an injury some months earlier. It was affecting her job performance pretty badly, and was not healing well. And in 1991, she was visited in her bedroom by gray ETs. She has no history of UFO encounters, did see one way, way off in the distance, but there were a lot of people there at that time. So yeah, some cases just seem to be this weird one-off, but I think I know why she was healed because there's a pattern in some of these cases. At any rate, these grays came in, flipped her onto her stomach like a rag doll. She was very frightened. She screamed at them, asking questions. They never responded. Pressed a cylindrical type device on her back, and energy came out and flipped her on her stomach and filed out of the room through the through the wall. She looked outside. She could see this eerie blue light, and she jumps up and rushes to the window, and the lights blinks out. They're gone, and she sees now that her back is completely healed. And so now it comes to why are some people healed and others not? I asked her what she did for a living, and she said, well, at that time I was an art designer, but now I do human rights activism, which I found very interesting because the pattern I've noticed as to who is being healed and why, other than someone who has a history of encounters, is that the people who are being healed are people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. They're often human rights activists or social workers or doctors or teachers or writers or inventors or police officers, something along those lines. It's a loose pattern, but it kept turning up, so I'm going to mention it. Barbara Lamb, she had another case where these two ladies were driving through Santa Clarita and started to be followed by a UFO. They pulled over to look at it, and suddenly it comes swooping down, scared the living daylights out of them. They start running across a field to get away from it. When it shines down a beam of light on one of the ladies, hits her in the back, and the beam retracts. And although it was a frightening experience, they were very happy because the woman who had been running had suffered from severe back pain. And after that, it was gone. I know these are weird cases. All kinds of people are being healed. It's abductees, people who are being taken on board, quote, against their will, and contactees, people who are having friendly contact. Greys are doing healings, human-looking ETs, praying mantis, all different types. This is Richard Rilke. He's your sort of classic contactee, like we used to see in the 1950s, George Adamski, Howard Menger, Daniel Fry. These were people who claimed to have friendly contact with human-like ETs. Some researchers do not believe these cases, and some do. They've somewhat divided the UFO community. I think they're probably real. They have more evidence, really, than a lot of the abductee cases, but were pushed to underground when a huge influx of abductions by Greys sort of happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Richard Rilke claims to have had numerous friendly contacts with human-like ETs and been healed on a number of occasions. After a sled accident, he had a severe ear infection, and he was healed of that. Another time he was at work and crushed his finger in a machine. The nurse took him into her office and said, "You have to get to the emergency room right away." She was sure he was going to lose this finger. He was visited in the hospital room by his human-like ET friends who cured him with a beam of light. He went to work the next day and completely freaked out the nurse, who couldn't understand how his finger was now completely healed. One lady I interviewed, she had a severe auto accident in Georgia. She found herself, outside the car after the accident and had some severe injuries, but the first responders couldn't understand how she had no scars on her face because it looked like she had gone through the windshield, and they couldn't understand how she was outside of the car. Some years later, she went under hypnosis and found that she had been taken from the scene of the accident into a UFO and healed of her injuries. It's not the only case I have like this. There's a number of them. The ETs, Greys, told her that she had actually died in this accident and she was not supposed to. Karmically, she was supposed to live. They said her brainstem had been severed, and they healed it. They healed all the scars on her face and wounds, and didn't heal everything. And they told her that some of these injuries had to remain due to karmic reasons. This I found very interesting because there are a lot of abductees, experiencers who aren't being healed, who have severe illnesses and aren't being healed. And perhaps that's the reason why, because illnesses serve another purpose in some cases. This is what the Greys told her. So yeah, they saved her life. Richard Rilke claims to have the same experience where he was killed in an auto accident and they saved him. Jerry Wills, he's a contactee from Kentucky. I talked to him firsthand. As a young man, he was visited repeatedly by a human-looking ET who taught him all these subjects. Right now, he's a healer, does very active healing work. And as a young man was visited by Greys, ironically, he was suffering from a very severe fever. They took him on board a UFO, gave him some injections, and put him back in his bedroom, and his fever cured up the next day. This is Leonard Stringfield. One of my favorite cases comes from him. It occurred to a 13-year-old boy by the name of Chuck Doyle from Florence, Kentucky, who was suffering from a severe head cold. Went out into his backyard one evening and saw a manta ray-shaped UFO hovering over his neighbor's pool. It was shining down a beam of light, which came right towards Chuck and struck him. He turned to run, did not run fast enough. This beam struck him and paralyzed him. He was at a 45-degree angle, hanging over the ground. He said a series of symbols went into his mind's eye, equations, weird colors and shapes, landscapes, and some stuff that just went over his head. He says it was like being struck by a bucket of ice water. And after a few seconds, this beam retracts and this object darts off. He falls to the ground, runs inside and tells his mom what happens. And I believe she saw the UFO departing as well. I'd have to check that, but at any rate, they noticed instantly that his severe head cold was gone. They called the doctor a couple of days later, and he was given a completely clean bill of health. It's a curious case. I don't know why ETs would travel light years or wherever they're coming from to cure someone of the common cold, but the fact is they do. I've got a number of cases of people who've been cured of cold and flu. I haven't found any cases of anyone cured of COVID, not yet. But I'm pretty confident that there will be cases because this is fairly common. Here's Jim Sparks. He's a very interesting guy. He recalls most of his experiences fully consciously. A number of people have missing time. They have to use regressive hypnosis to recall. 10-20% don't. Most people recall a good portion of their encounters anyway, but he recalls almost all of it. And he had one experience where he was taken on board into a room, and the ETs handed in this box filled with vials filled with black goo. He said it stunk really bad. He's like, "What's this?" They said, "This is our gift to you." And he didn't think it was much of a gift until they kept talking and said, "We pulled this out of your lungs. You need to stop smoking." At that time, he was a heavy smoker and stopped smoking after that. You know, they showed him images of himself very frail and sick. So he did stop smoking. This is a pattern that turns up in a number of abductee cases where people will suddenly stop smoking. I know of another case where a gentleman had pretty much the same exact experience, taken on board a UFO. The ET said, "This is our present to you." The only difference was he described square boxes instead of vials, or vice versa. The shape of the container was different. That was really the only difference. And they told him, "You need to stop smoking." And he was later abducted again, and the ETs told him, "You need to stop smoking marijuana. This is not the life we had planned for you." So these are ETs dispensing medical advice. I know Anna Collins and Beth Jamerson. Let me see, is that right? Beth Collins and Anna Jamerson. They wrote a book about their experiences. One of them was taken on board, and the ET told her, "You're gaining too much weight. You need to stop eating fatty foods." That pissed her off because the last thing she wanted was to be given dietary advice by these Greys who were abducting her. So yeah, lots of minor cures. Linda, she is a client of Edith Fiore, was cured of a yeast infection, as was her sister. This is the ET that Linda said cured her. And on another occasion, she was cured of cancer as well. This is the medical instrument that was used to cure her of breast cancer. This is Ventura Maceras on December 30th, 1972. He's a night watchman, 73 years old, from Argentina. He was struck by a beam of light from a UFO. He saw alien figures. People had to believe his story because there was a lot of evidence. The tops of the eucalyptus trees were burned. They're very tall, a couple hundred feet. The stream nearby was filled with dead catfish, and he himself was suffering from what appeared to be some sort of radiation sickness, headaches, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, redness, weakness. What's very interesting is following his experience, he started to grow new teeth. which really shocked the investigators. He ended up being examined by more than 60 times, interviewed by doctors, police, government officials, and UFO researchers. Not the only dental healing that I know of. ETs definitely do dental work. Here's a case from the book West Virginia UFOs by Bob Tietz. The experiencer, his name is Daniel, and he was suffering from an impacted wisdom tooth. He had been experiencing regular abductions by sort of gray type ETs and asked them to heal his impacted wisdom tooth because he did not have insurance to pay for it. And they did. So there's not a whole lot of dental healings. What I found much more common actually are people who've been healed of eye problems. Very famous case occurred on December 9th, 1968, to a Peruvian customs official. He was on his balcony and saw a disc pretty far up there, and it sent down these thin purple beams of light which struck him on the face and chest. At the time, he suffered from nearsightedness and rheumatism, and his severe nearsightedness cleared up instantly at the snap of a finger. He could no longer wear his glasses, and his rheumatism cleared up over the next few days. These were both, he thought, chronic conditions, but had been cured instantly by a beam of light. So I think these cases, have something to teach our doctors, and certainly we are beginning to catch on to the beneficial uses of light therapy. Another person, let me just go back. I wanted to talk about the case of Eddie. He was a client of John Carpenter, who was a Midwest abduction UFO researcher. Eddie had suffered from profound color blindness, was taken on board a UFO. The ETs removed his eyeball, not completely, just pulled it out of its socket. This is something a number of abductees have reported, and put it back in. He thought they were putting an implant or something, and he wasn't sure. But when he went to the doctor after this, because his color blindness had disappeared almost completely. He was only, he had green color blindness, but could now see all colors, which was verified by his doctor. Another case is that of Howard Mender. I mentioned earlier he's a contactee from the 1940s and 1950s. He suffered an eye injury on Okinawa during an attack by a bomb, and got shrapnel in his eye, and it became infected, and both his eyes became infected, and he went blind, and was visited by a nurse in the hospital tent who assured him he would be fine and applied some sort of lotion. And he asked about this nurse, and there was no nurse that the doctor could find. So that was strange. And later had an onboard experience where he was visited by this person who had healed him, who he described as completely human looking. This is Anna Jamerson and Beth Collins. I mentioned earlier one of them had gotten dietary advice from the ETs. They have both experienced vision improvements as a result of their encounters. In fact, one of them only realized she was having encounters because, like her friend, her vision suddenly, and for no reason that she could fathom, became normal. And under hypnosis, realized she was having encounters. And both have had fully conscious encounters as well, by the way. I've got other cases of people who've been healed of all kinds of eye problems, whether it's night blindness, glaucoma. A lady I interviewed from the East Coast had an experience with praying mantis, she believes, type ETs. Her husband is a abductee, and she was suffering badly from glaucoma. They beamed her head. She says she could actually feel this beam going into her brain, and it was pretty scary. And she noticed an immediate improvement in her vision and went to the doctor, and he was utterly shocked because her optic nerve had become much thicker. It had been thinning and thinning and getting dangerously thin. She was losing her vision, and they cured it. Another guy was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, and following this incident for 2 weeks, he had telescopic vision. He could see very far off into the distance when he wanted by sheer willpower. It was a weird effect that faded after about 2 weeks. I want to get into some other types of healing cases. This is Alan Godfrey, a police officer who came upon this UFO in front of him. It was pouring rain at the time. He quickly pulled out a sketch pad, sketched this thing, and the object took off. He rushed back to the station, told people what happened, and they came back to the spot. The spot where the UFO had been hovering was completely dry, whereas everywhere else it was wet. There was a lot of evidence that something had happened. Other sightings in the area came into the police station. Nevertheless, he got a lot of ridicule from fellow officers, which snowballed, and he was eventually forced to resign. But what happened was this was a missing time incident. He realized this later after investigating, and he started to have further encounters. Years earlier, while on the force, he had been injured during an assault and was no longer able to have children. He was physically unable due to injuries. And one night, he and his wife were in bed. She woke up and heard this object over the house, making a very loud buzzing noise. It completely freaked her out. He wasn't waking up. And it stopped and left. And the next day, they were intimate for the first time. She became pregnant. She was concerned he was concerned she was sleeping around, but she wasn't. He kind of knew she wasn't. He went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, well, I don't know how to explain this, but your condition of infertility has been completely reversed. And I know there's another case like that from Barbara Lamb. I know Brad Steiger has a case like that. Not the only one. This is Carl Higdon. He had an abduction experience in Rawlins, Wyoming in 1976, pulled into this tiny little UFO, said it was much bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. He saw elk inside in glass cages. He was a hunter. He was hunting elk. Apparently so were the ETs. It's a long, drawn-out experience. He may have been, in fact, taken to another place, another planet, perhaps. But at any rate, he was returned. His car was found out in the middle of a field. Other people were seeing UFOs at the time he was returned. It's a great case. What's interesting here is he was healed of 2 illnesses. His kidney stones disappeared, and he had tubercular scars on his lungs from tuberculosis, and those were gone as well. So he received 2 cures, and he's not sure how it happened, has no memories of how they did it. A number of cases of people have been healed of kidney stones. One guy was on the way to the hospital, David Del Mundo. Turned out his friend was a contactee. They were all driving along, 4 people in their car, August 1980, on their way to get the hospital because he was having a kidney stone attack. And suddenly this UFO appears, classic flying saucer, swoops low over the car and starts making weird passes over the car, circling it 4 or 5 times. And the guy who had kidney stones suddenly sat up. He's like, my pain's disappearing, guys. It's going away. I feel much better. And the pain disappeared and the object darted off. They went to the doctor anyway, and the kidney stones were gone. It's not the only case I have of people have been cured of kidney stones. One lady had her gallstone removed completely, just disappeared overnight, and she was a nurse, completely freaked her out. Lots of kidney disease cures. I'll just tell you one very interesting one. A lady was suffering from complete kidney failure. She went to her local doctor because she was having trouble urinating, had not been able to urinate for the past couple of days, and he was shocked. He's like, why have you taken so long to come to me? You are suffering from total kidney failure. You need to go immediately to the emergency room. So she went home and called her family, called her friends, called her coworkers, and said, "Pray for me. I need you to pray for me because I'm dying," and fell asleep on her bed, woke up in the middle of the night and was surrounded by short figures, dark skin, short humanoids with weird eyes, who proceeded to sort of massage her abdominal area. And she blacked out. She said they were there for a while because she kept waking up. And when she woke up in the morning, she felt fine. She felt good. She went to her personal physician and said, "You know what? I'm feeling much better. Can you re-examine me?" And he became very upset because her symptoms had completely disappeared and he could not explain it. I mean, he was happy for her, but he did not know what to think. He says, "I'm really sorry. I must have misdiagnosed you." She told all her friends, her family, that she had been cured by angels. She was embarrassed to say that they were ETs, and she really wasn't sure herself until about a month later, a few weeks later, she found herself on board a UFO. She was pulled out of her home into a round room, physically examined. The ETs took this instrument. It's one I've heard many times. It's an X-ray machine which displays all your organs in full living color, like a hologram. And they showed her her liver, or I'm sorry, her kidney. And they said, "Look, your kidneys are looking great. They're doing really good. You're doing good." And then they showed her her liver, and there was all this dark stuff, dark spots on it. And they said, "Your liver is sick. You need to stop drinking Diet Coke. It's damaging your liver." So, yeah, another case of ETs giving dietary advice. So, yeah, as you can see, they cure people of very serious illnesses. Another very large category is cysts and tumors, benign and cancerous. This is Bill Hamilton. He has an excellent case which took place here in Southern California, involving a woman who was diagnosed with a cystic mass in her breast, was due to go to the hospital the next day to have it removed, and had an experience that night, and went to the hospital, and they were unable to find the cystic mass. This is a phenomenon I call the last minute response. ETs sometimes wait to the very last second to cure somebody. I don't know why, even to the point of people will be in the hospital room awaiting an operation and a cure will happen there. But often it's the night before or even on the way to the hospital, like David Del Mundo with those kidney stones. I have a case myself. This is the case that got me interested in UFO healings. I met a lady who was diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tube. And she was very upset about it, as was her boyfriend. It was diagnosed, MRIs, the whole thing was causing her lots of pain and problems. And she has a history of UFO encounters, had an experience the night before the operation, went to the doctor and had the pre-op MRIs, and they couldn't find the cystic mass. And the person who reads the x-ray came up to her with a puzzled look on her face, and she's like, "This is really strange. We can't find your cyst, and it appears you've had an operation. Did you go have an operation?" And the witness denied it. She kind of knew what had happened, but she's not about to tell the doctor. And the doctor's like, "Well, I know you're lying because there's this fluid that's present only if you have an operation, and your cyst is gone, and that looks like a laser scar on your stomach. Where did that come from?" She hadn't even noticed that. So she still refused to tell them. Most people that I've interviewed don't tell their doctors what happened. Some do. It depends. But definitely for sure, these healing cases leave a long line of baffled doctors. So yeah, there's a lot of cases of people who've been healed of cysts. This is a picture of the lady I interviewed. She said she was abducted ever since childhood by gray type ETs, and that they were very, very loving, and she always looked forward to her contacts. This is Chris Bledsoe. He has a history of UFO contacts, but he had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease and was suffering from it for years and taking all kinds of medication. and it was pretty much handicapped him. He was not able to get around, and had an experience where he was taken on board a UFO. He was camping. His son was there, several friends. All of them saw the UFO. It's a very, very well-verified case, above and beyond his sudden cure of Crohn's disease, which is strange because, I know a number of abductees who suffer from Crohn's disease and they're not being cured, but he was. There are a number of people who have had heart healings. This is an illustration done by my sister-in-law, illustrating a case which took place in Durham, England, to Fred White. 4 years earlier, in 1963, he had seen a UFO. He saw occupants looking through the window. It was clear to him they were looking at him, and that this was not a plane or anything. It was very close. And then in 1967, he was hospitalized with a hole in his heart, had a lot of trouble breathing, a lot of pain, and was going to have an operation when in walks this very strange looking man with exotic eyes, and had this weird sort of, not a watch, but something on his wrist. And the man said, "We are very interested in your work with electronics, and we would like you to continue your work." Fred White was an inventor. So this is another example of people who are being healed as because I think of their profession. And made a few passes over Fred's chest, and suddenly he started breathing better and walked out the door. And the other doctors came in, and he asked them about that other doctor. Who was he, and what was that instrument, and that he was feeling much better. They took him for more tests, and there was no sign of this hole in his heart. So yeah, a number of heart cures. This is an illustration done by an abductee by the name of Katerina, a real estate broker from Oregon. While visiting Florida, she had suffered a near lightning strike and ran into the house and was trying to recover when she was abducted by ETs who told her that her heart had been damaged by the lightning strike, and they proceeded to cure her. She said it was pretty scary, actually. One guy had an experience where a human-looking ET came into his bedroom and plunged its hand into his chest. Really freaked him out, and that was all it did. It freaked him out so bad he couldn't stop thinking about it. He went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Oh my God, you've got a severe heart defect and congestive heart failure. I can't believe you're still alive. You need emergency heart surgery." He feels like this ET alerted him of that. So very interesting cases. This is another case of a gentleman who turns out he's a very active social worker, has won numerous awards in this area. John Hunter Gray is his name. He had a typical abduction with his son in Richland Center, Wisconsin, and was injected by the ETs in various places, just gray type ETs. It was a standard abduction, really, very quick. They had missing time, didn't really recall anything until a few weeks later. They recalled it spontaneously. But what's very interesting here is immediately following, and in the months following this experience, he started experiencing numerous physiological improvements or upgrades. I mean, he wasn't suffering from any illness, but suddenly became much healthier. Something I've seen from many abductees who have told me they've gone in for doctor's tests, and like one guy's 80 years old, the doctor says, "You have a heart of a 17-year-old. One guy, a bicycle racer, this is a case from Artie Six-Color Clark, experienced an abduction, and he came back and started winning all the bike races. He was much stronger and faster. So this is what I would call health upgrades. People report not getting sick. John Hunter Gray here, he said that his 5 o'clock shadow started growing again. He grew 2 inches. Mind you, he's a full-grown man already. His wrinkles faded away. He had several scars that disappeared. His hair and fingernails started growing at twice their normal rate. He quit smoking almost immediately. His feet grew several sizes. He stopped suffering from his yearly colds and flus. And his son also experienced the same things, but at a much more moderate level. So yeah, I mean, this is what I would call a health upgrade. And this is an illustration of John Salter's experience. But there are people who've been healed of very, very serious diseases. One gentleman was diagnosed with angioma as a young boy. Angioma is a malformation of the blood vessels in the brain. It was causing paralysis, loss of speech, and blindness. And he was on a downward spiral, and doctors did not expect him to survive. And suddenly he made a complete full recovery. Doctors were so shocked that they actually did exploratory surgery and could find no trace of the angioma. It was years later, after repeated UFO experiences, he went under hypnosis with Edith Fiore and learned that the ETs had actually cured him of his angioma, sawed off the top of his head, and did brain surgery with this laser-like instrument. Here's the instrument that Ted recalls that was used to heal him. And here is one of the ET types that Ted recalls seeing. Not your typical gray by any means. There was a number of cases of people who've been cured of liver disease. In Tbilisi, Florida, there was a wave of sightings, and about a dozen people reported various cures of heart disease. One girl said she was cured of diabetes. One person was cured of liver disease by a beam of light. A young boy just this light came into his room and cured him of severe liver disease. Another great liver cure occurred to Hans Lauritsen, who was actually a UFO researcher and had gone out on a UFO stakeout. This is in Finland, with his fellow researchers. When a UFO showed up, he was so severe with liver disease that his liver was almost twice its normal size and he could barely get around. And he found himself compelled to walk up to this UFO while his friends felt compelled to stay back. And he had this sort of interaction, and this object left, and he immediately felt better and was able to run back to his friends, went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Your liver is now of normal size." The ETs told him that he would now have the power to heal people, which is another message that we hear a lot. This is the cover of the book Secret Vows, which details the experiences of the Twiggs family, which started out as scary abductions by gray-type ETs, but kind of evolved into a really friendly contactee account. And every member of this family claims to have been cured at one point or another. Denise Twiggs had a C-section, was taken on board, and they cured her of her C-section scar, speeded up the healing. Bert had a severe flu. He was taken on board, and they told him he was dangerously ill and probably should have gone to the hospital. But they gave him some injections and told him he should go to the hospital anyway the next day. But his flu cured up. Their son was cured of a sty in his eye. The daughter suffered from severe asthma and was cured of an asthma attack. So there's a lot of contactee accounts. This is Sisto Paz Wells. He is a contactee who's really well known for traveling the world and showing UFOs to large groups of people. It's called Mission Rama. I've spoken to some of the people who are involved in this movement, I guess you'd call it. At any rate, there was an experience where he did a meeting up in Sebago Cabins, New York, upstate New York, in May 1988. And this is a large group of people. He called down UFOs in front of all of them. People in the surrounding area saw them as well. That evening, they were all in their cabins. A bunch of people were visited. One of them was a male dancer who who woke up with his pajama bottoms removed. It alarmed him until he got out of bed and realized that his legs, which had been suffering from a severe arthritic condition that forced him to stop dancing, were now cured. Another example, I think, of someone whose work involves the benefit of humanity in some capacity. Entertainers is another category. He's a dancer. So here is another great case. This is Joy Davies and her dog from Pennsylvania. She was suffering from arthritis, was used to taking walks behind her house and came upon this landed UFO. I was surprised because she didn't find herself at all afraid. They were friendly looking little humanoids who pulled her on board. It was a very brief experience. She saw a bright light. It's about all she remembers. Next thing she knows, she's standing outside the UFO and it's taking off, and she just walks back home as if everything's normal. Doesn't really quite realize the strangeness of it all until the next day, and her arthritis is cured. Turns out her dog was also suffering from arthritis, and he was feeling much better too. And believe it or not, I found about 7 to 10 cases, I forget, of animal healings. Ray Hernandez, his dog was due to be put down, was visited by ETs and cured of severe heart disease and arthritis. I know another case of a horse who was cured of foot disease, roosters who were cured of body injuries, and yeah, a couple of more dog cases, mostly pets. So this does happen. And yeah, lots of cases of arthritis healings. Ann DeSoto, she was a waitress. She was visited by a UFO in December 1988 in Watsonville, California, and had driven into this fog, had missing time, and it cured her of arthritis in her hip. A great case occurred to a young boy, 4 years old. Don't know why ETs would cure a 4-year-old boy. You know, there are people who are very elderly who are cured. But this 4-year-old boy was suffering from rheumatic fever and rheumatoid fever, and was very sick, very, very weak, was visited by a UFO on the way to the doctor, struck by a beam of light. It became very hot in the car. His mom was driving him. She became very concerned about this heat because, you know, she could feel it. And as they passed by this UFO, the little boy in the back seat who was sick suddenly sits up. And his color comes back, and he's smiling, and his rheumatoid fever had disappeared. So I don't know how they can do this in like a split second, but there are so many of these kinds of cases. This is Cynthia Hind. She's one of the leading UFO researchers in Africa. And she uncovered a case of a person who was healed of jaundice. I know of another case in England, a lady, one of the earliest cases. It occurred, I think, in like 1940s or 30s, was also cured of jaundice, which was, you know, a very severe condition. They were suffering pretty badly from it. Got a couple of people who were healed of blood clots. This is Michael Carter. He's a reverend and a healer and a social worker who was commended by President Clinton for his tireless work against racism. He's a really wonderful guy. I consider him a great friend after, you know, interviewing him. I just love the guy. He was having problems with grays abducting him for a number of years. And at one point, he suffered from a blood clot. His leg became swollen pretty quickly. And when it started to swell up and become painful, he went to the doctor. The doctor was shocked because his leg had, you know, was double its normal size. And he says, listen, this is very serious. You need to go on this cocktail of blood thinners and medication, and we're going to monitor you very closely. But this is a very, very serious condition. You should have come in much earlier. We need to monitor you very closely. And so he started taking this medication and was shortly into it when he was visited in his bedroom, woke up and saw this beautiful human man looking at him, wearing a robe. He had long hair, very muscular, very good looking. and holds out his hand, and out comes a beam of light from the palm of his hand. I should tell you that about 8% of the cases of people who are healed, it's done using what appears to be mind power or psychic healing. And that's what apparently occurred with Michael. He felt this beam of light hit him. It dazed him. It struck him completely on his front side of his body. And he fell back into bed and was unconscious and woke up the next morning and instantly recalled this experience. You know, the figure was there for a good minute or two. And he was super excited to tell his wife about it, and rolled out of bed and stood up and looked down at his leg and couldn't believe his eyes. His leg was now normal size. What was really interesting is it looked like his veins had been rerouted. They were no longer in the same position that he recalled. He went to the doctor, and after telling his wife, he went to the doctor, and the doctor was shocked, said, "How did this happen?" And Michael said, "You know, I don't know. I just woke up and I'm feeling much better." And the doctor said, "I don't believe you. You know, what happened?" And they argued about it a little bit, and Michael finally just said, "Listen, can't you just be happy for me?" So here's another case of a patient not really wanting to tell his doctor, which is unfortunate, because people should feel comfortable being forthcoming. But I have to tell you, I know people who have been forthcoming about their encounters and ended up in a mental institution, forced into it by their family. One lady, she had just had a baby, and her parents were not about to allow her daughter, who thought she was being abducted by aliens, raise her own child. So yeah, there's a couple of cases of people who've been cured of blood clots. So I've got about 10 more slides here, so I'm getting towards the end here. I don't want to keep you too long, but I wanted to cover a few more of the more severe illnesses and some healings of cancer cases. This is a very interesting case here involving a gentleman, a young boy who was cured of a cerebral aneurysm. The person here on your left is a contactee. He's also employed at the local hospital as the doorman. And when this very popular young boy suffered a cerebral aneurysm in this town, the doctors who knew of João Vicente Valerio's contactees asked him to ask the ETs for medicine. And João said he would ask. And he did. He asked the ETs for medicine. This is what the ETs he described looked like. And they agreed. And they gave him some samples of medicine and told him that it should be applied to the child's spine and his back and just rubbed into the body. And that's what they did. And it regrew his nervous system and cured him of what they thought was, brain death and cerebral aneurysm. They saved a portion of this medicine for chemical analysis, investigators did, and sent it off to a chemical lab. And unfortunately, the results were not, super revealing. What they found was that this was a material which melted at around body temperature. It appeared crystalline. They could not identify it, but it had the sort of appearance of brown sugar, crystals of brown sugar. And every chemical test they ran on it, they couldn't identify it. And finally, it just came back as organic, they thought, but chemically unique. So I don't know. It's a great case, but we came pretty darn close to getting some real physical evidence there. So lots of cases of people cured of serious diseases. One gentleman, he saw a girl suffering from muscular dystrophy. She was put under this sort of screen and cured of muscular dystrophy. A shield was placed over her body. A number of abductees have watched people getting healed. Linda X, who was healed of a yeast infection, she saw number of people healed. She says it was like a hospital. They were lining up to be cured of intestinal worms, of hip problems, of arthritis, all kinds of things. Alice Haggerty in 1962 was suffering from diphtheria. She was not expected to survive the night. She was abducted into a UFO, placed in a glass cylinder which filled with blue light. and healed her. She was placed back in her room, and the diphtheria was gone. They told her she had been cleansed. So there are healings of AIDS, appendicitis, Chagas disease, which is often fatal, epilepsy, a number of cases of fibromyalgia. One lady was cured of hemorrhoids, high blood pressure. One lady I interviewed was suffering from hypoglycemia to the point where she was fainting. She was losing weight severely. Doctors were unable to diagnose it or treat it. It was a weird condition. And she had an abduction experience and was healed by this 9-foot-tall humanoid. And her hypoglycemia cleared up literally overnight. There's a case of a person cured of multiple sclerosis, of several cases of people cured of paralysis. One lady, she drove under a UFO, and she realized that this was very close and not human, not earthly. So she drove off and noticed that her spider veins started to clear up. Her hair became much lighter, and many of her moles faded away and disappeared. So there's the top 10 causes of death as outlined by the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control. I have to tell you, the ETs have cured people of every single condition that's listed on the top 10 causes of death. So, I mean, that's, to me, speaks volumes about who these ETs are and what their agenda is. The 10th leading cause of death in the United States, according to the Center for Disease Control, is suicide. There are at least 3 cases of people healed of suicidal tendencies. I'll just tell you one. One guy was going out into the high desert here in California with a loaded gun and was ready to end his life, and held it up to his head when a gray appeared. It shocked him. He had missing time. He says following that, he just didn't feel, his suicidal tendencies had faded away. And there's a number of cases like this. Another guy I interviewed personally had this experience. So now I just want to get into a few of the cancer cases, and I'll wrap this up. This is a city councilwoman by the name of Lynn Plaskett. She was suffering from Hodgkin's and was undergoing chemo and not improving that well. When she was visited in her bedroom by this very small kind of ball of light, it levitated her, went around her body. She thought maybe she was being probed, but it was following this that her cancer cleared up very clearly, very quickly. There's probably about 30 cases of people healed of cancer. A famous case occurred in May 1974 to a woman by the name of Helena Charbonneau. She lived in Canada. This was in 1974. She had lost about 50 pounds due to pancreatic cancer. The doctors operated but couldn't remove all of it, and it just spread to her breast, her liver, kidney, spleen. Doctors said, you know what? It looks like you'll probably die in a couple of weeks. And it was when she was at her lowest, and they expected her to die shortly, when she was visited by a UFO, pulled on board. The ETs told her that there had been a request for her to be healed. Turns out Helena's friend is a UFO contactee. She's not sure if this is what happened, but at any rate, the ETs performed a long and painful operation. This is what the cancer operation survivors usually describe. It's a long and painful operation using various instruments which were placed on her body. She was opened up, things were suctioned out, lights were shined on her, and the ETs put her back and told her, don't take any medicine. You're going to feel bad for the next couple of days, but do not take medicine, just drink water. At this point, her skin was orange. She was just skin and bones. And she started vomiting, that day, and she was rushed to the hospital, given last rites. Her family came, and their doctors tried to give her medicine. She refused. She accepted only water, and very quickly rallied and survived chronic cancer. And there are a lot of other cases like this. One lady I interviewed, she was suffering from breast cancer, was pulled on board a UFO, underwent a severe operation, said it was very painful, and she was put back cured. She says it was fine because she had already undergone much worse with Earth doctors. And for that matter, she fears the government much more, who is also abducting her. One lady in France, she was cured of throat cancer. She could barely walk by the time she was abducted. There was a politician who was pretty influential in Brazil. His very young daughter was suffering from chronic stomach cancer and was expected to die. When a UFO landed in the backyard, this was witnessed by the entire family and the housekeeper. Very small dwarf-like beings came into the house and proceeded to do an operation. They opened her up, vacuumed out the cancer, gave the father a little sphere filled with about 60 pills, and told him to feed one to her every day, which she did, and she survived. So yeah, these are the cancer cases. I could tell you more. I'll just tell you one more. A guy I interviewed along with I did a chapter in the book for free along with Dr. Joseph Burks, because a number of people in the free organization had reported healings, and one of them was Jim Schaeffer, who had been diagnosed with cancer. He had a huge tumor on his neck. It was visible. It was bone hard. It was growing quickly. He was scheduled to have an operation. He had a history of encounters, by the way, and he would often see balls of light, orbs in his house, and had gotten into the habit of filming them as sort of evidence. And that night, filmed, using actually video, one of these orbs, which suddenly came swooping down and went into his chest. Really shocked him. He went to bed shortly later, woke up the next day, went into the bathroom and got the biggest shock of his life because his tumor was gone. It was just like gone. He went to the doctor, and his doctor's like, wow, Jim Schaeffer has told his doctor his history with the ET contacts, because he had often come back with scars and puncture wounds, bruises. Once he had a broken foot. His experiences have not been particularly pleasant. It's mostly shrouded in amnesia, but has been totally transparent and forthcoming with his doctors. He went to have his operation anyway. He was forthcoming with them as well. They couldn't believe it, but had no choice but to believe him because there was no trace of the cancer. They did an operation anyway because there was necrotic tissue, but there was no cancer found. In his doctor reports, which he sent me, the doctors put miraculous. They did not put ETs cured him for, I think, obvious reasons, because they can't prove that. This was alleged by the witness, but I don't see what other explanation there could be when there's so many other cases that match this perfectly. And there's another case of a guy who was suffering from lung cancer and was cured in the hospital room by gray type ETs, who said it was their gift to him for allowing himself to be abducted. A number of people feel like they are being sort of having their health maintained because they're perhaps giving the ETs genetic material and aren't particularly happy about it. But most people feel very benevolent towards these ETs and feel like it's done out of altruistic motives. There's sort of, again, a bell curve there. But I did find some other interesting patterns. One pattern that I found is that I'm looking into these cases is that there's a lot of alternative ways people get healed. People are healed as a result of an out-of-body experience, which often involves light, or a near-death experience. I found about 50 cases of people were healed as a result of lightning strike, which really shocked me. This is a slide of Mary Clamser, who was cured of multiple sclerosis following being struck by lightning. I have to tell you, most people who are struck by lightning suffer ill effects, and it kills a number of people every year. but very rarely it cures people of paralysis, cancer, blindness, and a number of other conditions. So I just think that's important because there's some interesting parallels. I also found many cases of people who weren't necessarily healed, but were helped in various ways. One lady I interviewed had a motorcycle accident on a rural mountain road late at night. It damaged the motorcycle, which had an old-fashioned Kickstarter, to the point where she was no longer able to start this thing, and it was all bent up. And she said two human-looking almost, maybe hybrids. They looked almost human. She says with sunglasses and a hat, they probably could have passed for human. Appeared. They never said anything. They grabbed her. One grabbed her motorcycle, stood it up. The other bent down and straightened the Kickstarter with his hands. They stepped back, motioned for her to get on the bike, which she did, and it worked, and she took off. It's a strange case. I know of another case of a guy who's driving along a Colorado highway late at night when a UFO shined a beam of light down on the highway in front of him and illuminated a mattress. It was on the road right in front of his car. He was about to run over it. He had just time to swerve. It saved him from the car accident. Another lady had a UFO show up and stall her car. She was getting scared. Finally, it goes away. Her car starts up, and she's about to get on the freeway when a huge accident occurs. She would have been in that position, she believes, but she was saved. RD6 Killer Clark talks about a case where a UFO hovered over a small village that was being racked by hurricane force winds. I know of a case of a lady who was being assaulted by a bad man in a national park. It was his intention to rape her. A UFO showed up and scared the living daylights out of him. He ran away from it. She ran towards the UFO. So yeah, I mean, a couple of cases of people cured of drowning and other cases. I have one case I personally investigated in my latest book, Onboard UFO Encounters. This is not in the book that I've written on the subject. She had an experience where she helped rescue some 1,000, 2,000 people out of a small village in South America. She wasn't sure where it was. She had found herself, on board this UFO and proceeded to help them take these people out of this village. And suddenly there's a huge volcanic explosion, and this giant wave of mud and debris sweeps over the town. And next thing she knows, she's waking up at her home in Florida, and she's had one of her UFO dreams, turns on the TV, and there's her, quote, UFO dream in full living color. It turned out the Nevada Del Ruiz volcano had just exploded. It killed some 27,000 people, apparently rescued at least 1,000 or 2. So yeah, cases of people being helped as well. Many cases of people coming away from their experience with the ability to heal. It's probably the most single common reaction, I guess you might call it, or spiritual transformation that I hear about. People, sometimes I get warnings about upcoming earthquakes, nuclear proliferation, or warlike ways. They're taken into the engine room and told, how the craft operates and that we don't need to use fossil fuels. And they actually, tell them how to build an energy-free motor. So these are, revealing the ET agendas. And a very strong one is people are taught how to do hands-on healing, Reiki-like healing, channeling, out-of-body travel, psychic reading, dowsing. They become very interested in these sort of things. And I'm going to put environmentalism and vegetarianism and human rights and animal rights along with that too, which is something I see in a lot of people who come away from these sort of experiences. People have been rescued in a number of different ways. People had a UFO hover over their boat right before it sank, which allowed the rescuers to pinpoint their boat. This is the Integratron, which was built on the instructions by ETs, by George Van Tassel, and was supposed to rejuvenate people. Unfortunately, he never finished it, but it fits this pattern of ETs providing information to help heal people. And I have to tell you, I think we have this technology. We have the technology that the ETs are using to heal people, because there are a number of whistleblowers now coming out who say that not only do we have crashed UFOs, we've got at least 1,000 whistleblowers who are saying this. More, I'm going to say. It's not just Roswell. It's not just the Aztec crash or Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, or the Aurora, Arizona crash. There are hundreds of these. I've written books about UFOs over a number of states, and I found UFO crashes in every state. So my point is, we have the ET technology, and most of this technology is healing technology. And a number of prominent whistleblowers say that we have devices that can cure people of cancer, that can dissolve tumors, that can diagnose all kinds of illnesses, cure heart disease, that have anti-aging properties. I think the ETs know better than to heal everyone all at once or hand over this technology, because we would probably abuse it, and we already have overpopulation problems. The only thing I think that's really preventing open official contact, honestly, is our own warlike ways, our own prejudices. This is what the ETs have actually told people. ETs do have, I think, an agenda of eventually having open official contact. They do make these very sort of prominent displays periodically, like the Phoenix lights and other waves. Another thing that's holding back open official contact is our government's lack of transparency and their inability or lack of desire to be more forthcoming and truthful. So this is why I think ETs are coming to the people directly. I believe there's a lot more healing than going on than the few cases I've listed here or that are in the book. Most people don't go and seek help. Most people do not report their encounter. Maybe 1 in 100 in my own research. I always ask, did you tell anybody? And most people say no. They did not report their sighting or experience officially. So I'm going to times any numbers we have by 100 at least. So the 300 cases I have would be probably closer to 30,000, 3,000, 3 million. I honestly don't know, but I think it's probably pretty widespread. And this is why I'm very hopeful about this phenomena. I regularly get letters from people asking me to put them in touch with the ETs, which I can't do. I wish I could. And I know Whitley Strieber says the same thing, that people regularly write to him to put them in touch with the ETs so they can be cured. There are cases of people who have asked for a healing and received it, but most have not. I think probably it would be more successful to pursue an inner pathway to healing, such as astral travel or meditation. But on the other hand, many people have asked for healing and received one. So it is my assessment that yes, ETs do have a healing agenda. This is not a phenomena I'm afraid of. I think ultimately it's going to turn out very well for us. I think what we have to do is get this technology out there, because we can get this free energy and this healing technology out there. We can not only cure disease, we can solve the environmental crisis, the energy crisis, and the economic crisis all in one swell swoop, one fell swoop. So yeah, that's basically my presentation. I'm happy to take questions if you guys want, but thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I have a number of questions here, and just sort of a quick one. Have you heard of people being healed of mental illness?
Yes, I did cover a few cases of suicide,
right?
Suicidal ideations. It's not super common. We do see a number of people who have autism, and one guy was suffering from pretty severe autism and had an experience where, and he felt his condition was improved, and it ultimately got him off medication. Yeah, mostly depression. Mm-hmm. There was another lady who contacted me. She was visited by this ball of light, which actually came into her kitchen, and she was having a tough time of it for months and months, and said, everything just lifted. It just lifted. So yeah, that does happen, but it's not common.
And there's a question here from Jenny Miller. You sort of touched on this. What do you think of Dr. Stephen Greer's assertion that the ultimate false flag or fake alien invasion will be used to take away freedoms? That many of the negative supposed ET abductions are actually faked with human ultra secret technology, and the abductions are also part of this plan to have humans be fearful of ETs.
I've talked with him directly about this. Very early on, actually, I asked him to write the foreword to my book, Ufo Healings, and he didn't want to do it. He says, you use the word abduction. I said, well, abduction is a real phenomenon. And he said, no, it's not. And I disagree. And we started going over case by case because I'm pretty well read on this phenomena. And I can't see how anyone can assert that because these abductions are far, far too widespread. And I know many, many cases that have happened to a young paper boy in Texas. No one knows about his case. That was not the government. You would have to have an army of people stretching back, many decades for this to be government. It's not government.
Right.
That's where I disagree. Do I think, our own government is trying to make ETs look bad? Yes, absolutely. I think that there's a slant towards this phenomenon. Well, fear sells. I mean, the media is partly responsible for this.
Right.
I think. And our own skepticism. Of course, there's an active cover-up, which has caused people who have encounters to be ridiculed. This is another problem. I personally can't point to any first-hand information regarding false flag operations. I don't have first-hand information on that. I try to keep tabs with what's going on in the field, certainly. I came into this field very naive. I didn't realize it was so complex and deceptive and layered with hoaxers, with disinformation, paid debunkers and disinformation people who work for government. We know this through the work of, oh gosh, what's his name? Not Leonard Stringfield, Stanton Friedman. We found, Donald Menzel, part of the MJ-12. He was a paid debunker. So yeah, our government are big fat liars about this. Every government study has said the UFO phenomena presents no threat to national security when they know full well it does. From a military standpoint, they are freaking out because these things are hovering over our military bases and are able to abduct people at will. So from their point, it's a hostile phenomena. And I sympathize with that because people are being kidnapped. But as I said, I don't think this is hostile. I think there probably will be a false flag operation. We can see that our own world is going through intense struggles with distribution of wealth, racism, poverty, disease, and prejudice, and all these horrible things, which make it clear that there are evil forces or not very nice people in power. So yeah, I'm frightened about the erosion of human rights. But in the long haul, if you look at the progress of humanity over, say, centuries, we're doing very well. And by all accounts, the ETs are very hopeful and says that we're moving towards a new age. Many abductees have been told that there's going to be a raise of vibration, a move into the fifth dimension, a fundamental change in the laws of the universe. It's described various ways. It's very interesting. But there's something that's going to be different. And
well, Paul is asking, there was an event last night, there's been this Harmonic Convergence 2020. I don't know if you've heard of it. And last night, a number of people, people were gathering to try to initiate ET contact. He wants to know if you were involved with that at all.
Not in a formal way, I guess, or an official way. But yeah, I'm aware of it, and I meditate, and there's been a number of harmonic conversions. I think that there is a spiritual aspect, I think, to this whole UFO phenomena. Some researchers are not comfortable looking into it, which is fine. But I've always felt, you have to examine all evidence if you want to solve any mysteries. There's a Bigfoot connection. There's a psychic connection, a connection with ghosts and near-death experiences, and all of this.
Right.
But yeah, I'm ultimately really hopeful about how this turns out, because I think it's going to bring us together.
And I know that, whenever you talk about this, of course, people are, we've had a question, you said people have approached you saying, how do I do this? How do I connect with ETs? And I know Stephen Greer is, putting out protocols for people to try to initiate contact. And here in the Bay Area, we have the People's Disclosure Project, and which also, tries to initiate contact. And how do you feel about it? And I know a lot of this has a very spiritual component, right? A deep meditation, and I don't know, this sort of sense of partnership or something that, kind of trying to raise your vibration to be able to meet with them. What do you think of this? What do you think of like actively doing protocols to try to call them in?
I support it.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways I've helped spearhead that movement because, Stephen Greer was the one who really took the horns on this and formed Project CSETI,
Right.
Which formed chapters across the US and I think the world. At any rate, he came to LA to form a charter group. I wanted to hear him speak, but he was charging way too much money. And I'm like, no, I'm not paying $300 to hear him speak. And to my surprise, the newspaper called me up, paid my way. They're like, we can't believe we're doing this, but would you write an article? And I'm like, yeah, are you kidding? And so heard him speak and became a part of the charter group. It was very interesting because as Stephen Greer was telling how this is how you call down a UFO, he said, here's, there's 3 ways of doing it. We do it through meditation, sounds, and lights. And here's a case of a first-class example of how you call it down using lights. It comes from researcher Preston Dennett. I'm like, whoa, that's me.
That's me.
And I knew instantly which case I thought I did. He was talking about, and the second case he talked about was again mine. And these were 2 cases I had written about earlier for UFO Universe magazine, where this guy used lasers to call down UFOs. One time it was lasers in San Diego, and another time it was pitch hill lights for NBC in the form of a peacock's tail, which they put it on. It was like a half disc. It looked like a UFO. They turned it on and 2 UFOs show up, just like they did in San Diego.
Wow.
So this is how you call down a UFO, I said in the article. And Stephen Greer's, I met with him. He's like, yeah, you kicked me into high gear. Well, when I read that, I'm like, wow. So that was really cool. And we went out, a group of us, some 50 people, that first night after the lecture, and darned if a UFO didn't show up. I could not believe it. It was very, very high up, 30,000 feet, a blob of light. It's not a satellite. It wasn't a plane, balloon, dirigible, shooting star, blah, blah, blah. And I was hooked. We went out the next night. There was much less people. It was a very cold night. And strobe-like lights came over our group. Long story short, we ended up going out for the next 5 years, sporadically, a core group of about 5 or 10 of us, and did not have frequent sightings, but had periodic sightings, almost always of anomalous lights. So yeah, I'm super excited about this sort of CE5 movement.
Yeah.
And totally support it, and I'm very excited to see where it leads.
We have a question wanting to know what percentage of people who have had healing experiences were already having had UFO contact before. You mentioned a number of people.
Yeah, half.
History, right?
Yeah.
Half?
Yeah, about half. There are a few cases where people are friends of contactees, or they have a family member. About a third of the cases, it's no prior contact with UFOs whatsoever that they are aware of.
So a third, interesting.
So there are a few patterns evenly divided between men and women. It's all over the world. No relation to race, religion, sex, age, education. Profession did seem to have an effect, as I mentioned.
That's interesting. And you also, it seemed like, many of these healings were clearly intentional, take you on board and we're going to do some sort of surgery or something. But some of them seem to have happened just by proximity, right? Like they happen to be in an energy field that cured, like the skin wounds mostly. It's like you mentioned, kind of. Do you think some of these are just I don't want to like drive by, but just because they happen to be in the right place at the right time and weren't necessarily intentional healings by the ETs?
I can only speculate. The reason I lean towards not is because I have a feeling that when a UFO shows itself to a person and it's fairly close up, they are very much aware of it.
Okay.
And healings like that aren't super duper common as in terms of like UFO sightings. And then everyone in the group who sees this UFO is suddenly healed. No, that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. So I wonder if it's perhaps an accidental byproduct, but I don't think so. I think they're sending down little beams of some kind.
Right.
I don't know. It's very mysterious.
There's a question. Is there a link to the video of the guy who was cured by the orb?
His name is Jim Schaeffer. He's fairly active in the field. I'd have to search for the link. I'm sorry. I did have it at one point. I believe he posted it online somewhere. It shows the orb just darting down at a diagonal towards him. So I'd have to look for that, and if I can find it, I will forward it to you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And I'll send it. People are asking if there will be a replay of this. There will. I will post it on our YouTube channel, which is FMBR TV on YouTube. And let me just see another question. Are there many cases of people being cured of traumatic brain injuries, including diffuse axonal injuries? That's very specific.
Yeah, I couldn't speak to diffuse axonal. I'm not a doctor, by the way. Let's just put that out there. So I do, in our LA charter group, there was an emergency physician and a allergist and a medical doctor, and so I do have a number of friends who are doctors, just being involved in this field.
Okay.
But in terms of head injuries, there was one guy who was hit by a bat. Accidentally, his sister batted him with a baseball bat in the head, and he says he was cured of a severe head injury. There was one lady who was assaulted. This is a somewhat poignant case, very severely, and had severe head injuries. Her head swelled up to twice its normal size. She was not expected to survive. They thought she was a vegetable, and they were just going through the process of what to do. Her friend, however, was a psychic healer and was meditating on psychically healing her when, boom, 2 praying mantis type ETs appeared. She had never heard of praying mantis type ETs. She said you couldn't have made that up if she tried. She had no idea anything like this could ever happen. But the ETs hovered over her friend and started pulling out bits of bone and bone slivers and rocks and stuff out of her brain. And she rallied for a week or two, but then died anyway. So ETs are not always perfect. Some of these conditions do recur after, like one lady who had her gallstone removed, had a gallstone come back. So that does happen. A yeast infection returned for one person. So it's not always perfect, but it usually is. And there's only a few cases of head injuries that I could find, actually.
Okay. Another question. In the course of your research on alien intervention with human health issues, have you encountered any humans who have also been involved in human-alien hybridization endeavors?
Yes. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the prominent ET agenda. There are numerous agendas. The Greys in particular show a very strong interest in human genetics. By all accounts, they are probably human themselves, but have suffered severe genetic damage. This is not, me speculating or even my assessment. This is what abductees have been directly told
Mm.
that we are actually related to them, that we are very much like them, that they have suffered severe genetic damage to the point that they are no longer able to reproduce or even feel emotion, and are, largely are just barely physical in some ways. So they're trying to ground themselves a little bit towards the earth energies, trying to get emotions back into their race and get the ability to reproduce. That's a very strong agenda. My very first case, involving contact involved this, and I see it regularly. So yeah, that's very common.
Okay, and I think the last question, have you heard of Omnek Onek from Venus?
Yes, I have. I'm not super familiar. Gosh, do I have that book? I might actually have that book. There are a number of people who, ETs who claim that they live on Venus in a higher vibration, or Mars, or they just say flat out, "Oh, we're from one of the Saturn's moons." NASA has pretty much disproven this. NASA, on the other hand, is also not very truthful or forthcoming, and have been called by the mainstream press never a straight answer. That's what NASA stands for, because they were not been forthcoming about UFOs on the moon. But when the whole truth about the moon comes out, people are going to be very shocked. So I'm not saying there's life on Venus or Mars or these other planets, but for all we know, there could be life at a higher dimensional or vibrational rate. There are astral planes out there. We can go out of body. This is not the real world. This is the physical world.
Yeah.
The true dimensions are on what we would call the other side. So that could be what they're talking about here. Some people who are abducted are taken out of body and experience these sort of things. So, but may perceive it as physical.
And Ellen wants to know: is it possible that some of these people, some of these ETs, are coming from the future?
Yes. And in fact, you could march out 20, 30 cases. And it's definitely a good theory as to some of the visitations, particularly by Greys. But I have to say, my assessment is that we are dealing with extraterrestrials in the classic sense. I recently wrote a book covering 15 cases of people who have been taken on board. One of them is pretty much convinced it's demonic. I don't think so. I've studied demons. One is convinced it's angelic. I think, entity behavior can fall into that vibration. Most of the people feel they're dealing with extraterrestrials in the classic sense. One guy is more of the camp of Jacques Vallée or Lauren Coleman or Jerome Clark, that this is not ETs at all. These are interdimensional beings that wear different masks. I think their ability to time travel is something we see quite a bit. I've got a number of cases where Greys, it's as if they stopped time, like the lady was pulled out of her car accident and healed. That took, a bit of time, and she was put right back in moments after the accident happened. It was as if they had time traveled. So they have that ability, and I don't think the time travel ability precludes an entity from being a, extraterrestrial or, corporeal. So my assessment is, yeah, they can travel in time, and I'm not going to discount the possibility that the Greys we are seeing are actually our children, and that we, in some timeline, destroy ourselves. We go on the path we're on in some ways and cause extreme genetic damage, and we turn ourselves into Greys, and they're coming back now trying to prevent it. That's one of the theories, and there are cases you can march out where, yeah, Greys have said this, that we are from the future. But some have said, no, we're from Zeta Reticula, or we're from Orion. When you say Greys, you have to be careful, because it's a very common type of humanoid, and I don't think they're all the same by any means.
Right. Someone wants to know if you're familiar with a secret space program.
Not.
And do you find them authentic? I'm not sure what that means exactly, but.
Yeah. More than likely, we do have a secret space program. We didn't stop going to the moon with the Apollo and Gemini missions. There's been rumors we've been to Mars years and years ago. I think that's probably true. I don't have firsthand cases that say that directly. I do have some whistleblowers who have contacted me who have seen what amounts to reverse engineered technology, or that we are flying these things around. So yeah, there probably is a secret space program. I'm not an expert in that particular area. I've got just a few smattering of whistleblower accounts. But if you look into some of the researchers, these other researchers, it's shocking. And I would point to Gary McKinnon, who kind of broke into the NASA website and found some real evidence of this. I mean, some honest to God evidence that they have not been able to refute. And that combined with the number of whistleblower accounts that are coming out now makes me believe that there is something to it, for sure.
Okay. So we have a number of comments just thanking you and for this really amazing presentation. It was wonderful. Again, I'm going to post it up on our YouTube page. It's FMBR TV on YouTube. Preston, can you tell people how they can get your books and where they can find more information about you? I know you've done some really interesting stuff as well with astral travel and a bunch of other stuff. So let's point them to your website and how they can get more information.
Hey, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks, Golf. Thanks again for inviting me. I really appreciate that. And if you want to learn more about some of my research, I do have a website. If you Google my name, it should take you there. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. Got excerpts of my books there. You can contact me through my website. If you have a question or a comment or a story you'd love to share, I always love hearing from people. All my books are available on Amazon.com. I'm mostly a UFO researcher. That's kind of my baby. But yeah, out-of-body stuff, anything paranormal, ghosts, it's all connected.
It's all
I think we've only begun to sort of tap into who we really are in our relationship to ETs in the universe. It's a really exciting time.
It is an exciting time. I think that's what's so exciting for me about it, is just that, I think hopefully humanity is starting to kind of lift our heads up and look around and see that there's a lot more to this experience than we've wanted to believe. Just this kind of third dimensional experience, and hopefully it can help us mature as a species and learn to live peacefully.
Betty Andreasson, very famous abductee, had a ET she was in contact with by the name of Quasga, and he told her, and I quote, "Love is the answer for humankind." I thought,
That's
wow,
isn't it? I mean, that's what all wisdom traditions have said. That's what angelic sources are saying. That's what it's sort of it's taking us a while to get it through our heads,
yeah,
through our hearts.
and that's a gray talking too. A gray alien.
Right? Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you everybody for joining us, and come back next week. Thank you, Preston.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you. It's awesome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.